Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion from DeFi to ReFi, Can Blockchain Technology Regenerate the World? This panel is hosted by the European Carbon Offset Tokenization, in short, ECOTA. We are a think tank connecting bright minds like Nadine, Michelle, William, and then on topics in and around ReFi, with a special focus on tokenized carbon credits. We want to provide you in the audience with the best possible education about this young and vibrant industry. And at ECOTA, we're passionate about the intersection of sustainability and blockchain technology. We want to use this combination to achieve a net zero for our future and for our planet. Panels like these are made possible by our trusted institutional members like Particular, Impact Scope, Carbify, Earthchain. So this time I can directly thank our panelists, but also our other members who are not on this panel yet for supporting this panel. I'm Max, I'm one of the two executive directors of ECOTA, and I'm your moderator for the event. Before we start, I want to encourage you in the audience to use our chat. We prepared an agenda for this discussion, but I'm always happy to talk with our panelists about your questions that you have about the industry. So feel free to just post your questions into the chat. Now, before we dive into today's topic, let's meet our panelists here. And Nadine, let's start with you. What are you working on and why are you passionate about ReFi?
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna start with telling you what ReFi is. I think maybe some of you haven't heard about that yet. That's what I at least experienced when I was at the European Blockchain Convention, that when I asked people, do you know what ReFi is? They were like, no, I only know DeFi. So regenerative finance, basically, there's no real definition, but basically it is a movement in the Web3 space which aims to make economics more sustainable and integrative. And so by using blockchain as a transparent ledger, they would like to increase this transparency and liquidity while enabling everybody around the world basically to fight against climate change. So, and what we are doing at Particular, we are building a data platform for focus on token issuer. So that are basically startups who are also working on kind of like regenerative finance tokens, so tokens who are, for instance, tokenized carbon credits, but also social token, biodiversity token, and so much more areas they are working in. But basically, they are not only the token issuer, they are also the infrastructure provider and also the chains like, Polygon you heard about, who are also really focused on sustainability aspects.
Thank you. Then let's go with you next.
So hi, everybody. Thank you, Max. So I'm Dan Graff. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of a company called Earthchain. We're based in the UK. I'm sitting here at the University of Leeds, which is where we're based, although we're not a university spin-off. Our thesis in Earthchain is that really behind a lot of the carbon emissions out there in the world, consumer economic activity is the basic cause of it. And if you look at the chart of greenhouse gas emissions over the last 30 years since the UNFCCC became a thing, you can see it rose and rose and rose despite the Kyoto Protocol, despite the Paris Agreement and all of this kind of stuff. There were two occasions where it actually slowed down and dipped. One was 2008 and one was 2020. And wow, those dates have obviously burned into the memories of everyone who went through those times. 2008 was the global financial crisis and 2020 was the COVID pandemic. And so we saw directly that changes in consumer behaviors caused a change in greenhouse gas emissions. It's there. And for us, that's a kind of an evidence. And what we want to do through Earthchain is we want to reach consumers through people that they already trust. So through businesses and partners that they already trust, to give them education that will help them to decarbonize by changing their habits, give them incentives to decarbonize, and give them access to funding climate action automatically on autopilot. And one of the ways that we do that is by bundling fractionalized carbon credits into payments for goods and services. And that's a really powerful way to generate funding, micropayments at massive scale, but you need a certain level of transparency. And so for us, the obvious solution for that was a blockchain. We didn't grow out of the ReFi or the DeFi scene. We picked the technology as a utility that we needed. And we were absolutely thrilled to see the adoption of blockchain as a technology, and all of the various mechanisms and ways of creating regenerative finance through technology grow. And now we feel ourselves kind of between the two worlds of consumer behavior and financing carbon credits and climate action through technology.
Thanks for joining, Dan. William, you can go next.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me. My name is William ten Zijthoff. I'm the co-founder of Carbify. We are world's first certified carbon debit. So we are directly changing the way companies are offsetting right now. We think that in the near future, there's no need for carbon credits anymore, because it makes more sense to tokenize absorbed CO2 instead of a future promise. So we are certified by the UNFCCC. It makes us you can use our CO2 tokens to offset your emissions, also for companies. But what's even more important is that we are also making a change. We recently planted 50,000 trees, but we don't just randomly plant trees. We want to do it to create a social impact. So we plant them at local communities in the Amazon, where we can address food security, to also give those communities something back. Because often what we forget in the traditional carbon credit scene is that the farmers or the communities are taking care of the trees, but they are not rewarded. So we reward those people who take care after the trees. And what we see is that everybody agrees with the fact that carbon debits are making more sense than carbon credits, but it's more an educational issue right now. So we have to teach people how it can be done differently, and then together we can make an actual change.
Thank you. Michel, you can go.
Thanks, Max. I'm Michele Soavi, Chief Sustainability Officer of Impascope, where basically we measure, verify, and amplify impact, positive impact. And in this narrative, I would like to add, like, from my personal experience, I like to say that in my previous life, I used to be a financial auditor, and I saw, all the existing limitations of the existing accounting and finance system. And in a way, I like ReFi, and I got involved into ReFi, as a mean to change the existing financial paradigm and, change them into ones which are more valuable, for the people and for the planet.
Thank you very much. So let's start into today's topic, and thank you all for the introduction. So we are in March 2023, and what a ride it has been for crypto in the last 12 months. We had Terra Luna and Do Kwon, we had FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. Just now we had the shutdown of crypto bank Silvergate and Signature. Bitcoin and Ethereum are down 50% from their all-time highs. So from my perspective, newspapers are understandably dominated by cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance topics. But there's a world besides Bitcoin, Ethereum, Uniswap, Aave. And this is what I want to talk about with you today. And this mirrors my personal journey into the blockchain industry. Ever since I bought my first cryptocurrency a couple of years ago, I always asked myself, hey, are there other industries where blockchain technology can have a real positive impact? And one of the answers provided in my conversation that I had was yes, in regenerative finance. Now, as an executive director of ECOTA, I'm obviously biased here. So let me ask you this then. You mentioned that you chose blockchain technology deliberately for your business model. Can you give me some insights on why that is? Why you integrated this into your business?
Yeah, Max. The thing is that when we provide carbon credits as a way of regenerating the planet, we bundle them in with ordinary consumer payments. Okay, and we're not talking here about ton-sized carbon credit. So for those who don't know, the voluntary carbon market works in blocks of 1 ton. But when you want to bundle some climate action with something else that's on a smaller scale, you need to be able to work down in the world of kilograms, right, in much smaller amounts. And I was really concerned that if we start to fractionalize carbon credits from ton down to kilo, that opens up a whole world of potential deception and fraud where the same ton can be sold again and again because it would be a black box. What appears on the registry, which, for example, Gold Standard or Vera would be that 1 ton block, but who can tell how many times it's been sold? So for me, it was really important that we use a public, instantly electronically auditable and immutable paper trail, digital bit trail, let's say, to prove that for every carbon credit that we sell on fractionally, that we can account for every single last gram, and we do it at 1 gram resolution, so nothing gets lost.
So it's about the integrity. Did I get this right?
You got it, exactly. It's about the integrity. It's about the instant auditability. You can just go and look. There's no way to hide. And in fact, really, when you think about it, we could have done that on a private relational database and had it all sort of in SQL in tables somewhere. But that would even have been harder than doing it on blockchain. It would have actually been harder. The costs would have been higher. The energy use would have been higher because we'd want it distributed to different nodes and data centers. And actually, it becomes very, very difficult. Just to jump onto blockchain and find a suitable solution was a very easy decision. And I think the only challenging part of choosing this technology was the fierce reputation that blockchain had, particularly at the time, which was 2019 when we began thinking about this, of being an absolute beast in terms of the energy consumption and CO2 emissions it produces intrinsically from the technology. You know, this was when Ethereum was still proof of work, and obviously, you know, people talking about Bitcoin having a carbon footprint bigger than the country of Belgium. Really, you know, another hurdle that you've got to get your potential partner or customer over. But we eventually settled on the Stellar network, which is actually quite a low energy intensity blockchain and really suitable for our purposes in terms of being a kind of tech for good environment as well.
William, I want you to chime into this. You mentioned in your introduction carbon debt. Maybe you would tell our audience what the difference is and why you maybe have a different perspective on what the ultimate underlying should be.
Yeah, a carbon credit, my co-founder always calls it a loan from Mother Nature that nobody has to pay back because it's credit has been issued or will be issued for 20 years. And I think it doesn't matter if it's CarbFi or whoever it is, but I think if you issue CO2 tokens, which go back down to the kilo, like Dan said, it should not be tons, so we do it in kilos. But if you only issue them after the tree has absorbed that CO2, you get 100% transparent debit. And that means that you don't have to rely on the future of the lifespan of the tree, but you do it afterwards. So, and then afterwards should only be issued after the proof of life has been given. So I think it's very important that we educate people to check if the tree is still alive. Everybody should be able to track. So in our carbon registry that we have, we geotag each tree that we plant. So we have 50,000 geolocations. And if you want to go there, you can go visit your tree. And I think that is how everybody should do it. Also, look at the news article in The Guardian of Verra and their carbon credits that were not actually there. That is something that the whole market, we all feel the pain because we are all in here to make a change. And then these articles get released and you're like, oh, here we go again. We have to teach people how we can do it differently. And I think if everybody moves to carbon debits, so only because then you also know for sure that it has done something good. Nobody can tell me. And I like what you said about the trail after it's being tokenized, but then you still have, of course, the issue. How do you know that when it goes to chain, it hasn't been sold 10 times? I mean, blockchain solves that whole problem. I mean, if you start from scratch at blockchain and holding a token or holding a credit or holding a debit is not a claim of carbon neutrality, you have to take them out of circulation. Blockchain is perfect solution for that because you can burn them and nobody can issue them twice. Nobody can touch it anymore. That is how you can almost 100% be sure that it's transparent, trackable, and that it's not being issued 10 times.
Nadine, I want to get your perspective on this because I think carbon offsets, I get the criticism from William, but I think the investment case is the most robust for offsets right now, also because it's from the European, we have an emission trading scheme from the European Union, for example. So it's more prominent use case of how blockchain can be integrated into offsetting. What do you think about like the carbon debts discussion that William just opened?
I think it's the most prominent discussion and the most dynamic one. That's why when we looked in the refi space, we said, okay, where, especially when you want to build a data platform, where are you gonna start? Like, it's so much to do, and so many use cases out there. And then we said, okay, everybody's talking about carbon credits. It's basically a financial instrument to finance projects, you can also say, and carbon is maybe the best thing to use to, you know, quantify impact, I would say. And yeah, and that's why we said, okay, let's start focusing on the carbon issuers. But I mean, William mentioned also a little bit about that, and I also told William yesterday, actually, in a call, that what I see in the market right now is that people are starting to build roofs of, when you imagine a house, they start with the roof and not with the ground. And that's really, I think, where the challenge lays, because I see a lot of, you know, DeFi applications, and they're making incredible stuff there, and they're adding all those technical stuff on it. And we see on the other side that the demand side is still lacking for a lot of issuers. So a lot of issuers are struggling actually finding customers to buy those tokenized carbon credits. And instead of finding a solution for the demand side, like what do they need actually, they start building, I don't know, insurances and staking mechanism and so on. So it's so difficult. And I think that's also the problem we have in the DeFi market, that we are always talking about making it easier for the Web2 world. And the barriers are really high, but maybe, I mean, at least for BMW, for instance, they don't care if they buy tokenized carbon credits. They are just focusing on the advantages, and that's why we have to change the narrative again to, let's focus on the impact and not on the technology, and use blockchain as an infrastructure and not, I don't know, as an, don't make it bigger than it is. And I think that's maybe also carbon could do, like, call it digitized carbon credits and not tokenized carbon credits, for instance. Start there.
Yeah. Mikhail, you have impact in your name. I'm wondering, so we talked about the carbon credits, carbon debts. Are there any other use cases where blockchain can chime in and do something good for the planet?
I think in this case, the most relevant one is to really use the blockchain as a ledger where somehow, the information can be recorded. Because, coming from a financial background, I have the feeling there's a need, to be able to connect the information, the off-chain information, with on-chain instruments that can help somehow, to increase the ability of trace that, to account for such elements. On the other hand, for sure, to be honest, on my perspective, I'm still a bit skeptical, when it comes to connecting off-chain real-world assets to the blockchain, because at the end of the day, blockchain was created for digital assets, and it's much easier if an asset was already born on the blockchain instead of trying to connect, the real-world asset with the blockchain. So I think from my perspective, that would be a big challenge there. And I think, that it's not just related to sustainability, but identity management, both for, persons, KYC, AML, as well as, management of physical goods on the blockchain would be two big use cases, which need to be solved yet. But I think, when it comes to traceability in supply chain, that could be another big one. And for that, it will take time in terms of developing also a methodology that is standard for all the different companies and not all the companies that are telling a different story.
You talked about something that comes up in my conversations all of the time. So carbon credits, for example, are something that is not blockchain native along the entire value chain. You have someone to build a project, for example. Right now we have a registry where it is accounted for if a credit is already retired. You have someone at the end of the value chain who buys something, and William mentioned this, who hopefully retires it so that it's really out of the world. Then, since you're building your business model on this, do you see a future where the entire value chain is on chain? Is that even a thing, or will what Mikael just mentioned always be part of the game?
I think the entire value chain on blockchain is possible. I think it's desirable as well, to be honest, because it just extends that chain of transparency. It just extends that high level view of everything. But I think that is going to take a long time to achieve, because, you know, as Nadine said, you know, DeFi building bridge into Web 2 so that people can understand it who are not of this sort of Web3 space, not crypto nauts, crypto natives, need help to be onboarded into this world. And when you start to look at the entire value chain, you've got players in there who are still transacting by sending Excel spreadsheets around by email. And you don't bring someone like that onto a Polygon, Polkadot, or whatever else network overnight. It really does take a bit of work and time, and they need to understand where the value lies. But one of the things that I find extremely exciting about the Web3 and the refi space is the idea of thinking about the whole big picture of all the different players building things, different projects, as a kind of a composable operating system where you can bring together different aspects provided by different people specializing in different parts of this. And I think that that kind of end-to-end supply chain view could be built through coalitions, composable different applications that can be brought together to achieve that. Sort of, it's a bit like building the layers of a network stack. We all know that the internet works, we just don't know how it works, but it's a bunch of layers. And all of these layers play their part. I think, Max, you mentioned yesterday that it's kind of impenetrable how it actually works, but my God, it does. Look at us. We're all in different countries and we're talking to each other, it works. And I think that goes as well for transparent impact. We all have a role to play. And if we're willing to partner and stand together, which is what's needed here, because never lose sight of the fact that we're trying to achieve impact, and never lose sight of the fact that we're against the clock as a species, as a planet. So working together is absolutely imperative, and composing our services and composing what we do to create much bigger solutions is greater than the sum of all the parts.
I want to take this to you, William, since you're also building something with the technology underlying it. Is blockchain even part of your sales pitch anymore?
Depends on who I'm pitching it to. No, I mean, our biggest clients are regular companies that want to buy carbon debits, but we don't mention crypto, but we do mention blockchain, because I think a lot of, let's call them normie companies, are scared of the term crypto, but they like the blockchain technology. Because we utilize it, and I think we should all utilize it. And if you start having everything on chain and you can show it, then you can also, companies will understand the value of blockchain, but they don't want to, I mean, they hear the news about all the crypto, and that is what they don't want to hear. They want to learn and be taught how to utilize the technology to have the transparency we all want. And for example, we have in the Netherlands, we have a lot of companies that lost some lawsuits because they had zero transparency in their carbon offsets. So you could buy carbon offsets when you flew a plane, or when you fill up your gas from your car, but nobody could prove that they really did something to offset it. And blockchain, I think blockchain is one of the solutions for that, to have full transparency for everybody. And it's not that scary anymore. I think everybody, if you compare, I always compare it to somebody who has zero knowledge. I compare it to banks. I mean, if we all go to the bank and want to withdraw our cash, it's not there. It's also digital money. It's the same with, and they use a ledger, and blockchain uses a ledger. So So it's not that different from what we have, that we are all using already.
Mm-hmm. Michael, let's get back to you. Here's a question from the chat. JD asked, does it really all have to be on-chain, or can there be a more efficient approach? And I think the person is there asking a question that we talked about. Is it beneficial if everything should be on-chain? Let's think this through in a value chain, for example, for a carbon offset. So this is, I think, the use case that we're all familiar about. So where is the value, for example, if everything is on-chain?
That's a good question. Personally, I believe, the more the merrier, but on the other hand, I understand it may be difficult. And from the other perspective, I think, also implementing smart contracts on top, of the value chain. So basically the idea is to be able to get some check and balances, along the process that makes sure, that basically the input of your process corresponds to your output. I think that's something that would be really useful and could somehow, avoid using the blockchain even when it's really difficult. Personally, it's difficult to say, which ones are the most relevant elements. I mean, it's easy to put on chain, financial information or digital information, the payment of the carbon offset, as well as, the digital certificate. But on the other hand, I think there are more and more solutions that with machine learning, satellite imagery, they're basically able, to check the verification of variation of coverage of forest. But hopefully even, again, from the physical perspective, there are more and more possibility to put the data on chain, and possibly, audit as well could help from that perspective, even though, having worked on that, I know it's not the solution for everything, but again, put as much data as possible on the blockchain, use audit and use smart contracts for check and balances. And you should get hopefully to a reasonable result. Satisfactory.
Another comment from the audience about this. Donato says, blockchain certified Internet of Things sensors can bring real-world data onto blockchain without the need of any bridge from off-chain to on-chain. Nadine, you talk to every participant of the value chain. Where are there interesting business models with these kind of sensors? I'm thinking about MRV, for example. Anything that is interesting for you?
I hope I understand the question right from the participant, but what you're meaning is, there are really, really great cases, and I actually like the ones who are tackling multiple problems. For instance, to make it a little bit more visual for you guys, there's one issuer I really like, and they are working together with Asian forest elephants. So for instance, those elephants have like a little band around their leg, and this thingy is like uploading data every day to the chain. And so that's elephant, and why they're doing that, the elephant has a positive carbon footprint on the forest, and they calculated the impact of this forest when they are elephants and when they are not. And because of that, such an elephant has a higher value, or creates a lot of value. And this money, which are creating out of the token sales, for instance, gets, I think 70% are going back to the community. So the communities there are also incentivized to protect the elephants, to do agriculture and kind of like save their fields for the elephants, so they're not destroying anything. So that's like a use case where you see there are people involved, and they get help, because in those countries we really have to work together with them, and that's a great use case how it is possible, to save the elephants, and you create CO2 tokens of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
William, I want to get your perspective on this. If I got this correctly, you are building a game on top of your carbon debt, right?
Yeah, not on top of, but we also building a game indeed. It's called Eco Empires, and what we do is we are trying to get the gamers into sustainability, and gamers don't like sustainability, or most gamers don't like it. They just want to play games. But what we do is we make sure that we utilize the CO2 in the game. So you need your CO2 to upgrade your buildings and to speed up your buildings. And at the end of a round, the players will get a certificate stating how much CO2 they have offsetted. So without them really knowing what they have done, they will get a certificate. Hey, you played this round in Eco Empires and you have compensated for 1 ton of CO2. And then they will realize, hey, okay, I've been playing this game and I'm doing something good. So yes, I think it's good that we all find smart ways to get more people into this topic and teach them about it. Because Nadine and I were speaking yesterday, and education is the biggest issue. I think people they want to do something, but they don't know how. And if we teach them and give them ideas on how we can do it together, then they are more open to it. So it all comes down to education and attracting them into this space, and then we can make a greater impact together.
Maybe to defend all gamers, I would also think of myself as a gamer, and I'm also talking to you guys. So
good. Well, I think with most gamers, I mean, if you want to play strategy games or you want to play shooters, you don't really care what's happening. I'm also a gamer, and I did not do anything with sustainability before, but now if you can combine it, you're like, okay, that's pretty cool. You can do the both things together.
Yeah, and I want to get your take on this then. So this is gamified, right? This is you can play a game and do good with this. Is this approach you also considered?
It is, yeah. I think where we want to change consumer behavior is in the interaction in things like banking apps and at the point of sale, whether that's an e-commerce checkout or whether it's at a physical point of sale in a retailer. So, our mission is to deliver what we call carbon intelligence to consumers through parties that they already trust. That can be the bank, and that can be a brand or a store that you go and buy things in. So one of the things that we do is we provide an estimation of a CO2 footprint for a consumer based on the transactions in their bank account. And then using that, we can generate tailored advice that enables them to go and make some different choices. So, for example, we could detect that somebody has obviously got a diesel vehicle because they're going to buy fuel. They have a leasing agreement, and you can see how much that leasing agreement is costing them. And then you get the option then of allowing the bank to offer them, for example, a lease on an EV instead, which allows the bank to move their lending portfolio into a greener space, allows the consumer to change their habit from running a diesel fossil fuel vehicle to running an EV, and also can demonstrate the financial case for doing that as well, because you can take into account how much they're spending on fuel and use some estimates to compare how much they would be spending on electricity instead for a similar sort of mileage, kilometerage. And I think there's a really, really exciting things that you can do. There's another use case as well that I thought was really compelling. And there was a supermarket in Norway called Oda, and they, during the pandemic, started to put a little carbon footprint on the end of the receipt when you bought something. And it was just a red, yellow, green. It wasn't going down into point whatever kilograms. Just this is high carbon, this is medium, average carbon, this is low carbon. And it changed consumer behavior, just releasing that piece of information. So I think that, initiatives like gaming, like banking, like consumer spending, checkout, all of these places where you can interact with the general public and just say, hey, you know what? Here's something you could do right here in this context. It's a little nudge, can be very powerful and change behavior at scale.
So we are talking about business models right now, but there is a question from the audience, and I want to get your take on this, Mikkel. Marta asks, can nature be protected or restored only when it brings economic value?
That's a very good point. I mean, it is somehow easier to do that when it brings economic value. And, there are big movements working on evaluating, natural capital. And so, for example, the Natural Capital Coalition, because at the end of the day, natural capital gives like what are defined as ecosystem services, which can be somehow quantified, in monetary terms. That may be a view which is a bit extreme, but I think that when it comes to ecosystem services, to bioservices, basically, biodiversity, sorry, I think it is possible to come to a monetary measure for every single natural asset, because at the end of the day, it has some ecosystem service which is provided. Therefore, I mean, it's probably more challenging, but yeah, as some value can be attached, to natural capital. On the other hand, you don't want to end up, in a system where basically natural capital is traded in the market. I mean, by default, in my opinion, it should be conserved. And if you give a price on top on that, you end up, creating a good like many other. And I think it's somehow a risky approach. But yeah, for example, internally, we are exploring the possibility of building a stable coin, which is partially backed by natural capital assets. So yeah, hopefully we will be exploring that soon.
I think what Marta's question also implies is business model has to be aligned with what good you're trying to do, right? But Nadine, you talked earlier about demand for projects is not a given right now. I'm interested in what are some business models that you think is where it is very good aligned and where demand is not a problem?
That's also maybe also to the question before, because I thought it's a really, really interesting and I also want to say because that's a lot of people are talking about, does it always has to be, or does always have something to do with money that people are acting sustainable? And I think our world is unfortunately probably just working that way. We have to, when we want to create incentives, it's always more helpful when it has something to do with money. But I think, and maybe that's also the refi movement is about, to kind of like changing the narrative about not only creating profit, but also creating win-win, and not only for humans, but also for nature. And I think that's also where the futures are, that we, changed a little bit the narrative that when you want to do something sustainable, it shouldn't have something to do with money, or I don't know, maybe I also wanted to add that. And to the use cases, we talked, for instance, to circular economy startups, and they're saying that's for them, it's really really a good market right now, because a lot of people are interested in circular economy. And also, I mean, it depends if it's and that's what you have on the carbon offset side, it's more B2B focused, and that's always a harder, target group than B2C. And when we talk about circular economy, that's mostly also B2C they are approaching. And there, I think, or I feel like that there are more people who love to, use this technology or have access to alternatives. And maybe that's why the traffic there is higher than, for instance, on the carbon offset side.
And what would be a use case in circular economy?
For instance, we maybe I can tell you about. There's, for instance, UCO. I think it's UCO network or UCO network. I'm not sure how you say it. But for instance, they are using used cooked oil. And when I heard that the first time, I was like, used cooked oil? Okay. Is it the stuff I have when I don't know, cook my egg, and that's the rest which I have in the pan? And they are actually collecting this used cooked oil and creating alternatives for I think for I'm missing the English word, for
recycling.
Like when you have like a different not gases, but creating
substitute. I don't know.
What do you put in your car, like when you
gasoline
fuel?
Yeah,
fuel.
but fuel. Yes, fuel is the word I was missing. Sorry for. But it's an recycled alternative to fuel, and they creating it just out of cooked oil, and I think it's just crazy what is possible.
And there was another question from the audience, and this is directed to William, and it ties into, I think, what we also hinted at. The question from Thibaut is, how do you make sure your carbon projects you invest on are going to stay sustainable? And it is a question hinting at, okay, carbon credit is sold. How do we make sure, for example, or carbon debt in your business model, how do we make sure in 5, 10, or 20 years that the tree is still standing and not already gone? How do you manage this problem?
I think that's a good question, because but it's especially for the carbon credit market, because a debit only gets issued after the tree is still alive. So for us, if the tree is dead, the owner of the tree or the communities are not getting their carbon debits anymore. So that is one incentive. And I think if you give back to the communities, what I said in the beginning, if you incentivize the communities to keep those trees alive, then it's always a higher chance of the trees being there. Of course, for our project, we'll have legal contracts and replanting contracts if needed. You can verify data by drone or GIS data or even satellite data that the trees are still there. And in our case, we pay a maintenance fee to the tree owners. We plant them at local communities or indigenous tribes in the Amazon. In our case, for the first batch, maybe we go to other rainforest or other areas, but it's always good to teach the communities and to get them back to the forest. They are closest to the trees and to nature, and they can take care of it. That's how we keep it sustainable. But it's still my first point. Yeah, with a debit, you only get it after the proof that the tree is still there and not a future promise. So in our case, it cannot happen that the tree is being cut down after 5 years and you have one carbon credit for 20 years. No, but then you don't get the carbon debits anymore for the coming 15 years. And there's a replant obligation for the tree owner, of course.
Then I'm interested in your perspective on this. There's someone criticizing your underlying.
Well, I think that the sort of methodologies that are used for forestry, so afforestation and reforestation, I'm not talking about avoided deforestation projects. I don't actually particularly like those. But afforestation and reforestation, the methodologies often take into account permanence and create buffer zones where a surplus of trees are planted. And the MRV process, so the monitoring, reporting, and verification, keeps a check on what those projects are actually doing to make sure that the forest is still there. But I'm not sure that that in itself goes quite far enough. I think what's really important is that when you invest in a project like that, you look for one that's set out, that's kind of chartered to be a multi-generational project, to hand custody of the project over to future generations, looking at a lifespan that's longer than an average human life, for example. And the second thing is becoming more of a thing now. There are one or two companies such as B0 Carbon, Silvera, Calix, who are acting as external auditors of some of the carbon projects, and they're getting very investigative and very forensic and getting right down into the nuts and bolts of how these projects are working. And they're doing similar things to what William just mentioned there, which is using GIS data, using satellite data, remote sensing to verify that these projects are doing what they say they are, and producing independent reports on them as well. So you can see sort of multi-axial data on things like leakage, things like permanence, things like additionality. And it's quite interesting. We looked at a project recently on a marketplace that we were interested in learning more about. And there was one ratings company said it was low risk, go ahead, buy it. The other one said high risk, do not buy it. So we asked the ratings company that we're working with to give us a verdict on it. And the answer was don't buy it. This was an avoided deforestation credit being sold on a piece of land that the person selling the credit didn't even own. It had gone to court. It was absolutely crazy. Yeah.
I know we're on time, but I want to take one last question from the audience, and I want to start with Mikkel here. So, well, it wasn't really a question. It is more an it's a statement, but I think it ties well into what we call this panel. So, hopefully, I'm pronouncing the name correct. And Ni said, no, I'm sorry. Oh, I lost the question. So the question was, it was something like, what blockchain brings to the table is the business case behind all of the carbon credits because of the integration into DeFi. And I think what carbon credits, so we can talk about, for example, in my introduction, I talked about Aave, for example. You can think about putting carbon credits, for example, into Aave and getting a carbon-backed loan out of there. So I think this is what blockchain traditionally was very good at scaling. All of these DeFi applications, but these are all like blockchain native. So is it really, maybe I'm rephrasing the question not correctly, but is it the DeFi integration case that will scale this market and that will have an impact, or the like supply chain traceability where blockchain can really add value? Mikkel, what is your take on this?
I think it has to be in both, for the system to work, both from the DeFi space and, for the perspective of the carbon tokenization. But on the other hand, I would like to close on a remarking, note. Do not just overly focus on, carbon, because otherwise we will end up creating other problems on top of the ones we have. Sorry, I'm in an ECOTA panel, but yeah, I thought it was important, to raise this point that carbon is just part of the problem, and there are many more that needs to be taken into account. For the time being, possibly the financial opportunity is still not there, but that's the whole point of ReFi, building new business models that are doing well for the planet and, which have a decent return on investment, not just on carbon tokenization.
The point that I just mentioned, it was from David. Sorry that I didn't remember your name. Nadine, I want to get your take on this. Is the growth coming from DeFi integration, so funneling money into different kind of, I don't know, Aaves, or is it from supply chain traceability and integrity?
It's a really hard question, especially when you look at the time. I'm actually also on Michal's side, that it's a little bit of both. When we talk about scaling markets, I think what is crucial, especially in ReFi, like I also said in the beginning, that we have to do the groundwork, and it's in the first place setting standards, which are also missing on the DeFi sides. That there are mostly no standards or regulations missing, and that's also what we see in ReFi. And I think it can only scale when we have clear, guidelines, and also our DMRV processes. I think that's crucial in ReFi too. That's mostly not the case for DeFi, but for ReFi. And when we have a standard for the DMRV, I think then the scaling point would lay mostly there, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense now, which I have to think a little bit longer about that.
Yeah, it was a very diplomatic answer, I think. Let's have our two application builders last year. William, maybe you can start. Is it so? Especially since you make a gamified version of this, I'm interested. Gamified, I think, is for me another DeFi use case. So is it more the gaming part that will bring scale the market and bring change to the world, or is it more the traceability?
I think for the B2B side, it's the traceability, but for the B2C side, it's the gamified version. Yeah, that's what I think. I think it's it's very difficult. I think it's a combination of both. I mean, you have to make it fun and traceable, and if you can combine both, it will at least bring mass adoption. Yeah.
And then lastly, you talked about how you integrate this, for example, or how you can imagine integrating this into a bank account, for example. So a bank account could also be a wallet, right? It could also be a MetaMask, for example. So which would also, for me, at least would be a DeFi case. So what's your opinion on this?
I think very similar to William's take, that the DeFi side of it is very appealing for the B2C case. I think it's compelling. I think it makes it fun and it makes it personal. And making it personal is what it's all about for me. I want the consumer to realize that they have an impact and that there are ways that they can change their behavior to mitigate that impact. I think that let's say, selling the idea of doing this on-chain to businesses is a bigger challenge, especially in traditional spaces. But the pragmatic Swiss answer that I've got for you with my Swiss background is that I think there is a middle ground. And I think that you can look at all the advantages that blockchain brings, and you can pitch them in a compelling way to more traditional businesses and help them to understand those advantages. And try not to get into business models which lead to perverse incentives and which become self-destructive. And once more, add another layer to some of the flack and difficulty that let's say the Web3 space has achieved. I don't think it's not really an achievement, but has somehow self-harmed over the last year or so.
So David, I hope you are, this was a good hot seat round for your question and you're happy with the answers that we could provide. So we're already over time. So unfortunately I have to cut it here, although I could probably talk for hours to you about this topic. So this has been a great discussion. Nadine, Mikhail, William, Dan, thanks for being with us today and making this such an interesting conversation. And also thanks to everyone in the audience. I hope you enjoyed this event. You can follow ECOTA on LinkedIn and on Twitter so that you don't miss any of our upcoming events. If you are an individual, you can join ECOTA as an expert or a fellow. And if you're an organization, you can join us as an institutional member and work with us together to decarbonize our future with blockchain technology and some of the use cases that we talked about today. And one last recommendation from my side, if you couldn't get enough of Nadine in this panel, she's going to switch roles and moderate an upcoming panel on circular economy, March 23. I can only recommend that you attend there. I think you can just Google particular an Eventbrite, right? It's the first link. I just tried it out. So you can just Google this and see Nadine as a moderator next week. So thanks everyone and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.